Hi, my name is John Light, and I've spent over 20 years working throughout all corners of the recruiting world. Our podcast, Drowning in the Tech Talent Pool, is a resource to help you stay afloat and get ahead of your competition. Hi, and welcome to this week's episode of Drowning in the Tech Talent Pool. I have with me CHRO extraordinaire, Sunaina Lobo. Suni, thanks so much for joining us this morning.
Well, thank you so much, John. Great to be here. CHRO extraordinaire. I love that. That's going to be part of my next business card venture. There you go.
I would slap it on top of my CV or even my LinkedIn profile personally. One of the things I found really interesting about your profile when I first looked at it is that you've had a series of really interesting positions. And every time you've made a move, it seems like you've moved to something that anyone's going to look at from the outside and say, wow, okay, this is pretty cool. I want to know more. And so I was hoping as we get started, maybe you'd share kind of a runway, a quick overview of your journey, where you started from and where you've been and how you've got to where you are today.
Sure, happy to do that, John. And, interrupt me wherever you feel like. Okay, I love that. I love that good back and forth exchange. If I want to start from the beginning, I grew up in a small little town, 22 million people, Mumbai, India. Very tiny.
Yeah, tiny. Yeah.
And I always joke about the fact that growing up in a city like Mumbai with so many people, kind of like New York, gives you a sense of resilience, which I feel I've learned from an early age, and I've had a chance to hone through my journey and my travels. I moved to Australia pretty earlier on, after I did my first bachelor's and master's degree in India and Bombay, and moved to Australia to do an advanced master's in human resources. And just loved it so much that I stayed on. I started working with ANZ Bank, which is a global bank headquartered in Melbourne in Australia, and did many stints with them globally. So they moved me around the world. I moved to several countries with them, worked in several different countries. They even moved me back home to India, which was very novel at that time from a talent management perspective. Out of university, I was campus recruited by 2 firms, and ANZ was the only one that said, if you want to go back to India, that's great. We'll recruit you and send you back to India because we've got huge operations in India, and that was very innovative then for someone, an HR leader sitting in Australia, in Sydney, hiring someone out of school in Sydney, saying, "Oh, go back to India for the next 2 years, and we'll enable that for you." So, that taught me very early on in my career that innovation in talent management and thinking outside the box is really important to grow, to not only attract talent from all of the world, but retain and grow and develop them in ways that are non-traditional. But from ANZ, I was...
That's a really interesting point, Suni, and I wonder, as we go along in this, maybe not in this moment, but as we go along, can we revisit that idea, that notion of non-traditional recruiting and talent management and that sort of thing? Because I think there's a lot there that people would be interested in hearing. Because when you look around the job market and people applying for jobs, there are candidates out there who have applied for hundreds of opportunities and don't even know if they've officially been rejected. Some companies send rejection letters, some don't. But most importantly, they don't understand why. So there's nothing they can do to correct it in real time, right? Is it my resume? Is it my years of experience? Is it whatever? But the idea of doing something non-traditionally, thinking out of the box, of being an innovator, I think is really, really intriguing from a talent acquisition standpoint.
I couldn't agree with you more, John. And my favorite phrase that I tell all of my teams and for folks who want to listen is always be recruiting. as a leader, and it's not as an HR leader, as a business leader, as any leader in a business environment, having that hat of, when I meet people, I have it in the back of my mind that I'm, maybe somewhere going to meet these people again, or I will hire them to come work with me. Because, talent comes in very different places. And that also leads really well into one of my favorite tenets around diversity. If you're being innovative and you're thinking about non-traditional ways to hire talent and attract talent, you are going to, by virtue of that, get more diverse talent to the table. And having more diverse talent around the table, as we all know, produces better business results. But more than that, it is a fun, innovative environment to work in, to have people from various different types of backgrounds bring all of their stories to bear around the table with having a diverse workforce. So to me, there's so much in there. There's innovation, there's non-traditional ways of approaching talent management, and then there's the whole idea and notion of diversity coming from being innovative around talent.
I like that. I like the idea innovation can drive diversity rather than, and I don't want to step out of bounds with the common wisdom here, but diversity for diversity's sake doesn't really drive anything but that. But innovation or innovative talent acquisition to help drive diversity, I think there's a lot of value in that, because you're stretching to get people that aren't necessarily on the margins, but maybe they don't fit a traditional job description for any given company. Yeah, I had a guest on a while back whose undergraduate work, I think, was in literature. Yet she ends up being a CIO or CISO later in her career because somebody looked at her in a more innovative light. And, now in an industry that is largely tilted towards men, here's this woman who succeeded and got into the C-suite, publicly traded companies, doing great, and doesn't have that formal education that would have put her in the normal fairway for candidates in her sector that she works in. So I think there could be a lot of value in that, frankly. And I kind of sit back and wonder too, to complete off the very first question, ask you to introduce yourself before I jumped in there with that thought. But where are you today? I mean, I know, and you and I talked before about you left a role and you did some traveling and spent some time with family. But when you look at the market today at this point in your career and where you've just come from, your context, what are you seeing? I mean, is it changing as fast or is acting as wonky as most people seem to think it is right now?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good question, and you and I talked a little bit about this. I think there are all sorts of things going on in the market now. I think the most pertinent question for me, and I speak to many CEOs and many CHROs, the most pertinent question for us in our industry to ask ourselves is, how do you, repair the fractured relationship between employer and employee right now? Because, we had the boom days, right? When we were hiring loads and hordes of people into lots of jobs in Meta, at Google, and all of the favorite places that we like to recruit at. And then we went through a point over the last year and a half where we had to be more thoughtful, about the business dynamics, about the macroeconomic environment which we were operating in. And I like to use the term feast or famine. And we went from feast to a famine approach to talent. And there were many layoffs. And I think that has created a real fractured relationship with employers and employees, where employees thought that, I've joined this fantastic company, I'm going to have, a wonderful career with them. And that's never going to end. I'm going to have lots of opportunities and grow and develop, which in a lot of cases for a number of years was true. And then it all came crashing down. So now we're at a point where we have a flood of talent in the market, and it's almost a reverse situation, right? Where employers have the ability to pick and choose the best talent. And in that whole process, how does the employee feel on the other end of the spectrum, where they might be that unicorn that the employers want to hire, but they're feeling, I've just had a really interesting journey over the last year with another employer. I'm just going to be very careful on how I managed my next entry into the workforce, so to speak.
Yeah.
So I'm seeing that a lot of talent that are very sought after are being very purposeful and thoughtful about values, about ethics, about making sure that they're feeling connected and they feel like they will have a sense of belonging with an employer before making a decision. On the other end of the spectrum, I find that I hear from a lot of candidates that they're not having the best experience. Because there's a flood of candidates in the market, it's almost acceptable not to go back to people and talk to them as to why they were not the right people for the role, or not even respond to calls from candidates, or having 5,000 applicants for a role, and recruiters finding it tough to even look at the 5,000 people who have applied for the roles, right? So there's this whole interesting dynamic of people who have a lot of opportunity and are being really thoughtful, and then there are a lot of folks in the market looking for opportunities, and they're finding that they can't even get their foot in the door because they're not even getting a response. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Well, yeah, I've actually heard that from a lot of people, and I've heard that across the functional spectrum. So I've heard that in tech. Yep. I've heard that in HR, where I have friends who are CPOs or CHROs. I've heard that in finance and accounting and supply chain and ops, and you go right down the list. And I know from the statistics that have come out that quit rates are down. That is to say, people aren't quitting jobs as frequently because they lack confidence that they're going to find an equivalent or better position. And, it's not lost on me that you had the dot-com bubble, which predates probably most of the people in the tech field. It doesn't predate me, but it predates a lot of people who started, came through college later, started working later, and they've had a decade or 2 decades of great run, to your point, with seemingly unlimited upside and opportunity. And they get to the point where here's this adversity, and companies are saying, wait a second, we've got to protect our financials. We've got to protect our profitability. We've got to protect our whatever. And so we need to let people go because we overhired during the lockdowns or whatever it might be. Whereas I come from a background where my first experience with economics was in the 80s in Texas, dealing with the oil field glut and the crash that hit this particular state.
Yes.
And I know oil is a dirty word with a lot of people, but bear with me here. I saw a chart in 2014, 16 timeframe. I forget what it was, but it was in a business journal, and they took the oil rig count from the 80s, from its peak to its bottom, and they took the oil rig count from the most recent downturn from its peak and its bottom, and they overlaid them. And what was interesting is in the 80s, it took a year and a half, 2 years to get from top to bottom. But in later time, it took 6 months. And so that industry has seen this massive compression of the business cycle. And I think part of what's being dealt with here is this artificially impacted business cycle in the tech world, where there was a lot of overhiring with the lockdowns. Then there was a kind of a compression where a lot of that overhiring got cut. And look, I don't subscribe to the idea that everyone who got laid off is a bad employee. I subscribe to the idea that it's a variety of people who get let go. And I guess a company could make a case that, okay, this person's not as productive as that person, but context matters, and what context you're in and doing your work in matters. And to your point earlier, they talk about a feeling of belonging. Candidates and companies, I think, have to find alignment. and not necessarily alignment in we want to take over the world, for example. Not it's that it was not a Pinky in the Brain reference out there for anybody who immediately thought that. But rather alignment in how we go about our business, alignment culturally.
Yes.
And that does, culture to me, I'm not pointing to, a person from point A in the world and a person from point B, and differences and anything of that nature, but just how we go about things. Because no matter where you are in the world, there's some people who are very methodical. Other people run around like their hair's on fire all the time. I think it's important that companies and candidates have some alignment between how they choose to go about their business. Because if that's misaligned, we spend too much energy putting on a facade to make our manager happy, to make sure they cut a good paycheck for us, give us a raise or don't fire us, whatever it might be. I think there is an experiential part of the market where candidates are starting to click to what you're pointing to, that, and companies too, it's not just a job. It's an association. It's a partnership. And if I remember correctly, the word company actually comes from a couple of Latin words that mean something along the lines of bread sharer. People are sharing bread. They're participating together. And it's a lot better when the person that you're working with, if you're have a high drive factor, that they have a high drive factor, versus in a situation where you try to take somebody who's very methodical and used to a lot of support and processes, and you put them in a startup and expect them to thrive. They're not going to thrive. They're going to be challenged.
Yeah, and the thing, jumping in there, I think you're talking about core beliefs, right, John? When you talk about alignment, when you talk about culture, there's something to be said about testing core beliefs when you engage with a company, right, through a hiring process for both the company and for the candidate and the employer, and that be part of the journey of discovery, so to speak, right? And if you approach, you were talking to me about people asking you, how do I approach the market right now? And I think when you're looking for your next career opportunity, thinking about it from that perspective of, there has to be a good fit on both ends. And it's not just me looking for my next opportunity. It's also looking for a place where I can thrive. So I feel the sense of belonging. When I say belonging, do I feel I can be myself and bring my whole self to work every day? Or do I feel like I need to put on a facade because there are things about the organization that I am almost compelled to be like? And when you find that magic of the organization where you can be yourself and bring your whole self to work, then you start doing that a little bit of extra, and then you start being more innovative, and you start bringing your ideas to the table, because they are not only being heard, or you're not only being hired because you have a diverse perspective, but it's being leveraged. The fact that your perspective is diverse is being leveraged. It's not shut down.
Yeah, well, it's welcome. And look, I'm a big believer. If you have an idea, put it on the table. Now, people may go, we've been there, done that. That's not going to work. But why not put it out? It goes back to the old story that if you find a problem, the worst thing you can do is take the problem up the chain, up the chain of command, and say, oh, here's a problem, and then shut up. That's the worst thing you can do. If you're going to have a problem that you've surfaced that you need to take up the food chain, then you need to go in there and say, look, I found this. Here are my thoughts on it, about how to approach it. What are yours? And act like you care enough to collaborate. Act like you care enough to invest of yourself. And in my experience, if you put up a facade, you're burning energy. And we've only got so much energy every day. And I would rather put that energy into being more of what I am than otherwise. And I think when candidates and when companies get down to brass tacks, if they spent more time in understanding what that person is, what their strengths are, and just tell them, hey, I want more of this from you, or saying, hey, I want to work more towards my strengths, I think you get a better situation, a better relationship, a better future, more upside for everybody. But there's always going to be that component within companies that's motivated by what's on your P&L and what's going on in the market or sales rising or falling. And there's always going to be a part on the candidate side where there's always going to be a segment of the candidate population that's chasing something other than alignment and right fit. And
yes, absolutely.
So you're always going to have that disconnect. I think it's just we need to be more savvy about it.
I think you just need to lower the friction points of that disconnect, if you know what I mean, right? So making sure that on both ends you're able to assess that more frequently than you're not, so that you end up in a situation where you have an employee that is I like the word sticky employee, right? We talk about sticky customers. I also like to talk about sticky employees, an employee that wants to be part of the community of the company that you operate in, and feel like they can, grow, develop, and contribute, right? And then there's a great relationship on both ends. Talking about that stickiness, when you find that you don't have that same set of core beliefs, then you're going to get into the problems of disengagement and quiet quitting, and I'll just be here till I find my next great opportunity.
Yeah, well, and often we find that when people have that disposition, finding your next great opportunity is more the exception than the rule. I've always found that the next great opportunity tends to present itself to the people who are busting their heinies, who are doing good work, hard work. Was it Tolkien in one of his books who wrote something to the effect that the reward of work well done is more work and more exposure to opportunity. Hey, you said a word earlier that really caught my attention, and that word was resilience. And the reason it caught my attention is I have a bookcase on the other side of my monitor here. And one of the books that I really like on that list is called Top Grading. It's written by a guy named Bradford Smart. And when I started off in the recruiting business, I worked with a guy with a small firm and a small retained firm who taught me how to interview. And years later, I came across this book, and Top Grading really is about interviewing and talent assessment, fit alignment, and that sort of thing. And I'm reading through how he proposes to go through it and his experience, what's worked. And it's everything that I was taught early on. I mean, almost word for word in some cases, a little frightening, actually. But in the book, Smart has a chart of qualities that were needed in executive positions he had participated in doing the searches for or hiring for, primarily in his time working with Jack Welch at GE. Mm-hmm. And out of these 200 categories, what surprised me, and I think it surprised probably a lot of people, the number one category wasn't resiliency, but that was up the food chain. That was up in the rankings. But the number one was resourcefulness. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And it really made me pause because, we tend to look, when you look at resumes, you tend to look, have they worked for a name brand company? Have they got the right education credentials? Do they have the right number of years of experience? Have they been doing the right function, had the right training program, and these sorts of things? And we don't always consider that to truly assess a resume, which is just a stamp, if you will, an imperfect stamp of what that person is as a professional. Maybe there's some things we ought to spend more time assessing, like resiliency, like resourcefulness, because a resourceful executive, a resourceful middle manager even, or a resourceful individual contributor can find ways to make do and do more with less, and if you have a whole group of people with that mentality in a company, I mean, you can impact the bottom line in ways that are difficult to quantify on a case-by-case basis, or outside of a case-by-case basis, I think. So I'm curious, has it been your experience that may be an area that we all overlook, both on the hiring side as well as the candidate side?
It's an interesting question. I mean, resourcefulness is, and when we were talking earlier, I was mentioning to you that the three main things that I look for, especially when I, as a CHRO, you hire for executives and you hire for different positions in the organization. But as an HR leader for HR talent, I look for agility, resilience, and courage for HR talent, right? And, I look at that more broadly too. But I would say, courage is something I specifically test for and look for in HR folks, because we've often, created these, the type of profile of HR professional we've created is come through the operational ranks, and who might not have the courage to challenge and to question and to have a point of view, which is what businesses need most today. They need partners, business partners who understand how to accelerate business results, but are focused on people and talent. So that's one thing that I'd say. Resourcefulness, I think, comes through a lot when I think about hiring people personally, and I look at resumes. And when you talk about this, which university or college do they come from? Where do they, have they worked with pedigree companies? Have they done X, Y, Z? Right. If you get into the mold of just screening for those criteria, you are going to get a bunch of non-diverse talent. Again, when you look for resourcefulness, you look for things like, has this person done something non-traditional? And have they been able to succeed having done something non-traditional? And having your eye out to spot that and to assess for that when you're hiring for talent in your organization is really important, because you want folks that have done something non-traditional in their lives and their careers to be able to then it feeds into resilience, it feeds into agility, it feeds into, I have the courage to actually question the norm, right? So I think there's a lot of value in that insight, and something that I always look for in candidates, rather than, where have you gone to college and what, have you worked at these different companies, right? It's more around what have you done and how have you been able to solve problems both personally and professionally, because a lot of that bleeds into each other, right?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I counsel candidates all the time when we do interview prep. I tell them, don't ask questions that are binary. That is to say, they're yes or no. Ask questions that are built around how, what, when, where, why. And listening to you say that, it's kind of like when you check the boxes, they went to the right school and they did the right this and the right that. Those are almost these binary questions. They either did or they didn't. But we miss the how, what, when, where, and why. And in my experience, if you go to the bottom of a resume and work your way forward and ask a candidate the reason for leaving or reasons for leaving every time, you might be surprised at what you uncover that speaks to courage, agility, resourcefulness, resilience, that speaks to, compassion, that speaks to flexibility, that speaks to a lot of great qualities that companies need. Companies cannot be homogenous and succeed over the long run. I think you end up getting stale and you trip up and you have issues. And, a lot of people, I think, that are younger in the workforce tend to look out and say, well, these companies are doing great and they're not like that. And so on. If you look back over the past century or so, the number of companies, and I've seen these studies where they show, okay, here are the top 25 companies in the US 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. And you see these changes happening. Yeah. It's easy to get stale and fall by the wayside. And that's not just with companies. That's with organizations, hiring teams. It could be a developer team. It could be an HR team that has global responsibilities or smaller responsibilities, and you end up getting stale. And it's not to say we should change people in and out for the sake of freshening things up and shaking things up, but rather we ought to be aware that there's more than a resume to a person.
And how do you assess for that, and how do you make sure that your screening criteria actually brings those folks and the resumes up to the forefront?
Yeah. Let me switch gears with you for a second. And let's talk for a minute about the impact that artificial intelligence is having on both hiring teams and job seekers, on candidates. Because I've done a series of presentations on this topic for an organization called Financial Executives Networking Group. I happen to know some people there, including a gentleman who's led the Houston chapter for a long time, over a decade. Was fortunate to do some presentations for him in other markets like New York and Charlotte and so on. And I'm curious to get your thoughts on, if you're a candidate, you're a job seeker, how is AI impacting you, but also from the hiring side of the equation, because my fear is there's this impetus from the hiring side of the equation to become less human, or to take some of the human connection out of the process. So I'm curious to get your thoughts on that, if you don't mind dropping the bombs out there and seeing what happens.
Yeah. I mean, I think this is a hot topic today, right? We're all talking about AI not only in hiring, but if I think about it broadly in business, and then I talk about HR teams. AI is really going to significantly impact how we structure our HR teams and what they actually focus on. I would say to folks who are in the market right now and looking for opportunities, and I'll come to what I'd say to employers doing the same thing, is that, relationships and leveraging relationships is never a stale art.
There you go.
Because I think a lot of us get caught up in this, there is an algorithm and an AI intervention that is going to screen for us and is going to get us the best bang for our buck from a employer's perspective, from resources, and for a candidate perspective. Show me the best jobs that are in the market, for example. I think the most poignant relationships are the ones that you have fostered through your career and you have leveraged through your career, and those trump any AI interventions that an organization might employ or deploy to seek good talent out there. So I would say for job seekers, never underestimate the power of your relationships, and never think that art is a stale art, because that is the most important thing that can get you in the door, especially when there is this flood of candidates in the market. As I said, I was just talking to a recruiter who said that they put out a job that was a fairly senior role and got 5,000 applicants in 2 days. So
Yikes.
You are in you are in a market when that is happening, and employers are going to be forced to use AI technology and tools to help them, decipher what is the best talent from that 5,000 list of applicants that come through. So the thing that differentiates you is the power of the relationships that you have built along the way when you've entered the workforce. And that's very important.
Yeah. And you can't, I was having a conversation a week or two ago with someone else, and not on a podcast, but just in general terms. And we're talking about, I don't think we'll ever not have the human element in the talent acquisition process, because in the end, people hire people. And AI, I think, speeds up the numerical side of it, the science of it, if we want to put it that way. But there's an art to it, to your point. I think that's an eloquent way
Absolutely.
to put it, that there's an art to this. And, it's funny and it's ironic too, in a sense. You look at generative AI today, it can synthesize all kinds of stuff based on the data you fed it. But what it doesn't do is create something just from a puff of a thought in your mind. And my favorite example is, what AI today, generative AI, have put peanut butter and chocolate together. Now, I don't know about you, Sony, but for me, this is an important topic because peanut butter and chocolate and I get along very well. Get along very well that I don't run around worrying about a beach body when it's Halloween time. Instead, I collect my peanut butter and chocolate tax from my kids' Halloween bags. But with AI put that together, unless you told it to, unless you fed it that information, that the data related to it, and the answer is no. So there's an arc part of this thing that we do as humans that make us what we are, that AI is still a long way from catching up with, if ever. We don't know yet. The theory of the mind, I think, is what it's called from an academic standpoint. But to your point, it can help the science be faster, the numbers be faster. But at the end of the day, the hiring game and success in it and finding the right role for yourself and your success in your career is largely a result of the effort you put in to get elbow to elbow with people. Absolutely. And build those relationships. And
couldn't agree more.
Look, that's probably a challenge. That's probably a challenge for a big chunk of the audience, right? Or of candidates out there, because not everybody's extroverted, but you don't have to be an extrovert to build a relationship. You just need to be you. And let me tell you, just speaking directly to candidates and personal experience, in most cases, you are enough. You are enough. And don't forget it. Tell me something, because we're going to be...
I'll tell you another interesting stat before we move on to the next point. Over 60% of CEOs are introverts. So
I've read something like that before.
For all of the folks who think that being an extrovert is the name of the game and is going to get them their next role, please remember that stat because it's a really important one.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Let me ask, speaking of important stuff, okay, I always have an important question I like to ask everyone that who's a guest on Drowning in the Tech Talent Pool. And that is, Suni, tell us something about you and a passion project or something you're passionate about that really lights the fires. And maybe it's not in the HR space per se. It may even be professional, but I'm curious to hear, what lights your fires?
Ah, wow. This is a great question. I have so many responses. There are so many ways that I can take this and so many directions that I can take this in. But let me pick two. So okay. And the first one is something that I'm very passionate about. It's about education for girls and women globally. So my mom started this when she was alive, and together with her, we sponsor a girls' school in a village in India, where there's not always the opportunity for girls and young women to go to school or be educated. All of the funds that a family might have is deployed towards the male child in the family. So I've done this now for over 10 years. My mom passed 7 years ago, and I still continue her legacy. And there's nothing that gives me more pride and joy than getting notes from these lovely young women from the school and who've graduated now to do bigger and better things. So that is something that
that's a great feeling. Hey, that's a great feeling when you help someone out. It's a great feeling when they come back to you, and it's a year or 3 years or 10 years later, and it almost just hits you, that wow, this made a difference. This is impactful. And it made a difference, not just in her life, but in the lives of the people around her. So kudos to you, and awesome to carry on your mother's legacy. That's something to hang your hat on, to be proud of.
The second thing that I was alluding to earlier, John, was as I talked about, doing something for girls' education, and especially in India. The flip side of that coin is, in my professional life and my professional career, I'm really passionate about developing HR talent and developing HR talent globally because I've lived and worked in 8 countries now.
Wow.
In my career, which has been a fantastic ride. I have had the opportunity to meet people and be in touch and grow and develop people and work alongside people from many different cultures globally. And my one passion is to create as many CHROs as I can and as is possible, and to create as many HR leaders who are good business leaders and who help accelerate business outcomes. And that's something that I hold really near and dear to my heart.
Wow, that's awesome, in my opinion. And I love you carrying on your mother's legacy. And I love the fact that you look at your profession through the lens of how can I help? I think those are things that people tend to miss, because a lot of times we think about what's important to us as something that's selfish, that's for us. And I don't think in either case those are self-centered issues. I think those are issues that are very, very personal to the people you help. And that's awesome. Suni, thank you so much for joining us on Drowning in the Tech Talent Pool. If everyone who's listening actually knew the gist of our introductory conversation we had a while back, they might wonder if we would either keep going or cut another episode later, because we could probably go on for a while. But I've really enjoyed it, and I wish you all the best. And I hope that you and I can stay in touch. And who knows, there may be some intersections out there that happen, because I can always use somebody who understands HR to contribute to my realm of understanding. And on the flip side of that, once in a while, I do a pretty good job on the talent acquisition side. So we'll see how it goes, but thanks so much for joining us.
Absolutely. It was a pleasure.
Awesome.
You've been listening to Drowning in the Tech Talent Pool. This podcast is sponsored by Sabretooth. Sabretooth improves the quality of hire and speeds up the time to fill specialized machine learning, data engineering, data science, and developer roles, stretching tech recruiting budgets further by bringing the precision of retained search and the speed of contingent search to the market in one complete solution. Find out more at sbr2th.com and follow me, John Light, on LinkedIn. Thanks for listening.